My favorite game of 2018 was Wolfgang Warsch's The Mind, a cooperative card game for 2 to 4 players in which each player has a hand of numbered cards, and in which all of you are trying to discard all the cards in play in ascending order into a single discard pile without talking about the cards you have in your hand. If you do it all, get rid of all the cards, you complete the level, you go on to the next level with more cards in hand, you complete a certain number of levels, you win. If you make a mistake, playing things out of order, you lose a life. You lose all your lives, you lose the game. Very simple, very straightforward, interactive. I've talked a lot about The Mind. Not what I'm going into here, but what's interesting is to see people who did not like it, not only just say they don't like it, but they said it's not a game. It's an activity. It doesn't meet the qualifications for a game, which seems like a very bizarre argument to make, given that The Mind has rules that all the participants adhere to, and it has a win-loss condition to determine whether you won or lost the thing you just did. Not sure what else you would need in order to call something a game, but I have not been able to convince people who hold this opinion. I'm not sure what their objection is in this simple activity. People have their own definitions of what qualifies as a game. Mine is very straightforward. I just laid it out. There's all sorts of corner cases for whether something may or may not be a game, and it's interesting to explore those corner cases because people make interesting things for other people to get involved with and participate in. And there was another wave of games that sort of fell under this, is it a game or is it not a game, question in 2016. And that's where there was a huge line of escape room games that were published with Exit das Spiel from Inka and Marcus Brand from Cosmos, and Escape the Room from ThinkFun, and Escape Room, the game from Identity and Spin Master, and Escape Room in a Box, the Werewolf Experiment, which was kickstarted and then picked up by Mattel a couple of years later. In 2017, we had Unlock from Space Cowboys. Same year, we also had Deckscape from DV Giochi. There's been others as well. There's a lot of escape room games. Escape rooms are in the air. It's a huge activity, lots of people getting involved with it, and designers wanted to recreate that experience in a tabletop manner. Something you could play at home for less money than you would spend going out to an actual escape room and running through all these activities. You're going to have puzzles, you do something, you try to do it within a certain time limit or complete certain things, and if you do, here's your score. Or just you win because you did something within a certain amount of time. There's all sorts of different ways that these titles let you know whether you won or not. People can debate whether they're a game or not, and they have an awful lot in the Board Game Geek forums and elsewhere, but from my standards, they're a game. You all participate in it under certain guidelines. You win or lose based on whatever criteria that you have. And we don't get into debating. Maybe some of them have those criteria, some of them don't. Whatever, it's enough. We will consider it a game. There's a new line that also skirts this, is it a game, is it not a game, question, coming out from Pegasus Spiele, from designers Michael Palm and Lucas Zock. It's a title called Undo. There's 3 Undo titles in the series right now. And if you look at the boxes, you get to see these happy people participating in Undo, which is kind of funny. Like, you think that they're the ones who just came out of the escape room and they're celebrating. But in fact, no, because here's their current state. They're all dead. That's not good. But in Undo, you are a weaver of fate. And your job that you have undertaken is to undo that death. And to do that, you're going to look throughout history at all different points, and you're going to see what might be different. When you open one of the Undo titles, this is what will greet you. Something familiar to anyone who's played one of the escape room games or a legacy game these days. A big hand telling you not to sort through these cards, not to look through them. You will spoil what's coming up. You have to lay out the 13 story cards, and these create the timeline that you will explore as a weaver of fate. Each card has a date on it, how many years ago, or months ago, or days ago, or hours ago, or minutes ago, as well as one single card highlighting the circumstances of death. Each card will also have a location on it, and below each of the story cards, you will have a clue card that has 1 or 2 words on it, and these words appear on the other side of this card. So you know somewhere on this card is mentioned the Pharaoh's wife, and Ra, and halves. Surroundings? A mansion. You almost put together a little story based solely on the dates that are here, the location, Thebes in Upper Egypt, and then Memphis in Lower Egypt, Egypt, Cairo, Berlin, Germany. Anyone who knows some history, why would we be going from Cairo, Egypt to Berlin, Germany? And no, this is not Raiders of the Lost Ark. You have Hamburg, Germany, Berlin. Okay. We combine the places, the times, the words from maidservant all the way up to a grave, exhibit, door, railing, person. There's something going on here. We have magnifier cards, which will let us look at these clues. We have time cards that are going to track the rounds of the game. And we have fate cards. We're going to have to change fate if we're going to do anything. And each of the undue titles is going to start with the circumstances of the person's death. Anyone who's played an escape room game knows that you have to be wary of spoiling the experience for someone else. You don't want to give away the ending of that particular game because, of course, getting to the ending is the entire point of playing. That's the only thing that you're doing as you're trying to play is get to that end point. And if you tell me something up front, well, then I'm going to be looking for certain objects or activities or people or whatever it is that you have just mentioned as I make my way through. And eventually it's just going to be like, oh, there's that thing that that person mentioned. And there's something else. And okay, I guess we're close to the end now. There's a lot of taking away the mystery of what you're trying to do. Undo works a little differently in that it kind of goes backwards because you are starting with someone's death. And that's given to you right up front. They're told in the rules to read the circumstances of death card. So we know that on January 29th, 1994 in Berlin, Germany, well, in disbelief, the old lady falls over a railing. What's more, her eyes do not betray panic, but grief about what has happened. She hurtles towards the ground from the 5th floor of a hotel, smiling fondly, while looking at the tuft of blonde hair in her hand. Her final breath becomes a small plume in the cold air. The last things she perceives is a terrible scream from above, and the city lights mingling with the stars in the night sky. So there's a lot of information. It's not a spoiler at all because that scene is depicted on the front of the box. So you already know what has happened to this woman, and it's not good. I don't know if she looks like she's smiling there, but a little bit going on. So in addition to the story card, you are also given a clue card to give you some sense of what a clue is going to be. So the clue here is railing, and the railing is highlighted in this particular card. And then when you read the clue card for railing, the railing is stable and has the usual height. Whoever falls down here was either pushed or jumped voluntarily. After you read these 2 cards, you return them to the timeline, and now you're faced with 12 different story cards along with clue cards related to them, and you are going to try to piece together a story that will lead up to this woman's death. And more importantly, you are trying to change that. You're going to choose some player to be the first player for the game. That player will remove a time card to show that they are taking their turn, and then they are going to choose one of these cards. It's up to them where they want to go. They can go 12 minutes ago, the most recent thing before this woman's death. Maybe that will let us know what happened immediately beforehand, and we can see what's most important. Or do we want to step back in time? We've got 18 years ago, then 8 days ago. So something 8 days ago might have been the trigger point. Or we can go back even further. 40 years, 70, 81, 3,330 years ago. So maybe this is the critical point. Or maybe we just start right at the beginning. Whatever card that person settles on, they're going to read the short scenario on the other side of the card and then be presented with an A, B, and C choice. Something happens as a result of that scenario, and you, as a weaver of fate, get to decide what it is. So Undo presents an interesting depiction of time travel in that you're not really traveling so much as surveying this entire landscape, this entire story that has a particular beginning, the endpoint with the death, a little bit afterward. And you're going to sample particular points over that time, but not everything, because you have 9 time cards and there are 12 cards that you can look at. So you will not see everything. So as you read a card, you're going to get some information, and then you'll be presented with 3 choices, A, B, and C. And you and the other players will debate what those choices are, and then you have to decide which one you want. You get the final decision as the active player, but of course, you want to talk with everyone out and figure out what's going on. You are making a story out of all the little parts that are coming together. And ideally, you're going to make choices that improve this person's life and prevent them from dying. But you won't necessarily know what they are immediately. You have to just piece them together over time, because when you pick one of the fate cards, you turn it over. If you get a 0, that means you didn't really change anything. Okay. If you get a positive number, great. You helped out this person in some manner that you may or may not be clear on what you actually did. If you get a negative number, you made things worse, and that person is definitely more likely to die. Hopefully you did not do that. So you did something, you made that choice, you reveal that number. Possibly you used one of your 4 magnifier cards to look at the clue card related to the highlighted card in this highlighted word or words in the scenario to give you something else to piece things together. And then the next player is going to go. They're going to choose a story card, read it off, make a choice, read something else, make a choice, and you'll slowly accrete information and ideally put together what has happened, a la Memento, if you're familiar with that film. Although in Memento, you start in the middle of the storyline and you kind of branch backwards and forward, or I guess if you want to put it here, and branch backwards and forward, and you get little bits that slowly work together. It's very structured and organized. It's brilliant. One of the best movies I've ever seen. Undo works a little differently because, of course, the choices are up to you, where you want to go and what you want to see and what you want to spend the magnifiers on. Because when you spend a magnifier, you can look at the clue for the current story card or any earlier story card. Maybe you've come along, you've read something else, and you're like, well, that sort of puts things in different contexts, but I'm not exactly clear what happened because we got a 0 and we didn't actually change what was going to happen in the future. Let's spend that magnifier and look at that clue card. And maybe something will happen that will piece things together for you, and you can figure out what's happened over time. This is kind of the limit of what I can say, and it's interesting. You know, it's again very similar to the escape room games because I want to let you figure out for yourself whether you want to do this. And if you do, I don't want to say anything else beyond what I already have, because that's what you're going to get anyway when you open the box. You get that experience of the death, and then you carry on from there. What's interesting, though, is you have to focus on what your mission actually is. What are you trying to do? Yes, you're trying to put together a story, but you're also trying to prevent someone's death. And so sometimes, if you know how someone dies, right, this is the paradox in a time travel story. You know that this person died, and so you say, well, I'm just going to take the spark plugs out of their car, and then they can't drive, and they won't be in that location. And then something will happen, and of course, they get there anyway. They get around that. This is not the situation in Undo, because you are looking at this frozen timeline. You're going to make all these choices for what will change. And then once you've finished the 9 rounds, the rules, just sort of mentioned, all the changes happen at once. Which, of course, doesn't make sense, because if you change one thing at the beginning, well, then probably you would not be in an identical situation later on. But I'll just hand wave that all away. You've made all these changes, and you add up your scores, and then you're going to look at one of the cards, and based on whatever your score is, maybe you prevented that person's death, maybe you haven't. Maybe you've made things terribly worse. Or, yeah, you really got to know them. So it's interesting to have that focus again on preventing someone's death. And so you have to make choices to do that. And sometimes you will make unexpected choices because all that matters is preventing this one person's death. If someone else dies, that's not your job. My job is to prevent this person's death. Focus. Pay attention. Put everything together. It's been fascinating playing these. I played all 3 of them. Of course, I've only played them once. I played them with 2 different groups to try to get different group dynamics in playing. And one group was very much into creating a story for everything and just elaborately going on as to why something might be happening, what's going to... We just do everything possible. And then you were presented with the 3 choices, and how might those 3 play out? More importantly, what one seems to have actually happened? Because we definitely don't want to do that. And so it's interesting making those choices in the context of someone who's familiar with writing and putting things together. And I watched lots of documentaries on movie making and things like that. And you've got all these movie making script choices that kind of play into undo. So if you think about things along those lines of how you structure stories, and that's going to play into how you play undo. And what was interesting is playing with one of the groups, it was my wife and son. My wife is a full-time writer like me, although she does not write about games. She writes business pieces for trade publications and different business clients. And she found the experience very frustrating because she was working on an article earlier, and playing undo is very much like editing an article where you're taking disparate interviews from all different sources and lots of notes from different research elements, and you try to shuffle all those together in order to make an article, in order to put something together. That's what undo is. And so my wife Linda was like, this just feels like work. So it's interesting to be coming at the story from that perspective where, yes, it is somewhat like writing an article in that you're trying to put everything together the right way, but you don't know what the important elements are. And that's the big difference because, of course, as you're interviewing someone and when you're writing for a publication, and I've done this long before I was doing writing about games full time, when you're putting things together for a publication, as you're interviewing someone, often you get like, oh, that's a key quote. I know where that's going to go. I'm going to center this section around that because that's relevant to the topic at hand. And there's research that plays off of that. Or you dig up some sort of data that works and say, okay, this is the crux that this thing is going to turn on. And you're assembling the article as you're interviewing people and doing research and kind of putting that all together in your mind because you know what the important elements are. And then undo undoes that because you don't know what's important. And you may not even see the most critical elements of the story because you're only seeing 9 out of the 12. It's a little frustrating to have that happen, but you have to make guesses and assumptions. And then that plays into what you do all the time when you meet people and you hear little bits of their story and you're trying to connect the dots on why they are the way they are and why they like something and what they believe and so forth and so on based on the little bits you've heard about them. Undo has that sort of experience where you're going to draw on your personal history and people are going to approach these stories in different ways based on what their own past are and the way that they feel about people. Hopefully, you can prevent murders and then you'll end up with 3 happy people at the end staring at you from your shelf as opposed to the other view you can have, which is much less uncomfortable and not something you want to see long term. So hopefully you can undo the past.